Thank you, Eric. Not that you're already sick of seeing me anyway, because I've been on like almost everything already. But now I get to talk about what I want to talk about. The song that he had playing was Wild Horses by Rolling Stones, which was recorded in the Muscle Shoals studio. I'm happy that you already gave the background because I'm thinking how much history, because of course I went in a deep dive in the same thing. Did you know who the most famous resident of Muscle Shoals, the city in Alabama, was? Helen Keller.
Fascinating.
Did we know that Helen Keller was from Alabama?
No.
I was like, I thought Indiana, Nebraska, that's what I'm picturing, but she's from Muscle Shoals, Alabama. So when Eric first asked me, and I love it when I get given a topic. You know, I have a lot of topics that I talk about and do keynotes and podcasts for, but I love with this, and I really love his approach, and also appreciate you already kind of gave the background, so I don't need to spend time on who they are and what they do and everything. Though it is this kind of a crazy story about, you know, one studio got made and then they all moved to the other studio and then who's getting what and all these different things. But it all comes down to community. I mentioned that he had Wild Horses. A more appropriate song for me would be the Love Boat theme, because in Charlotte, I'm referred to as the cruise director. I even have a name tag they made for me that says Rick Doten Cruise Director with the Princess Cruise Line logo on it. Because how it happened is a couple of years ago, Cyber Risk Alliance came to town to do a CISO dinner. And by the time they got to me, they're like, Rick, we've talked to like 4 of your friends in town. They're all like, does Rick know about this dinner? Make sure Rick knows about this dinner. They're like, are you like the godfather of Charlotte? I'm like, no, I'm like Julie McCoy of the Love Boat. I'm just a cruise director, make sure everyone's included, make sure everyone has a good time, make sure we're not taking advantage of it, make sure that it's something that my community wants to take care of. So I am the one who, in Charlotte, and we have a tight community. So going back to musicians, the musicianship is so tight. When we talk about Muscle Shoals, we talk about other ones in Detroit, in LA, and Nashville, and Memphis. These session musicians were known by everybody. And they were known across the musical industry because it's such a tight community. One of the things I didn't realize what's unique about cybersecurity industry in my CISO community is that in Charlotte, one of my dear friends is one of our executives at Centene, who's one of the deputy CIOs, and she takes me along to the CIO events. And you know, I'm just really just her comfort animal because I'm very social, as you can tell, and I already know everyone in town. Everyone knows me, and I can like run interference for her. She's like, I just want to sit and do something. No one bother me. And I'm like, Rick, you just take care of everything. But it's been really interesting going to CIO events. Has anyone been to the Orby Awards or Orby Awards? You know, it's a CIO thing. And I go to this Orby Awards, and I'm sitting at this ballroom with, you know, 500 people in all these tables, and they're getting up and they're giving each other awards and they're doing acceptance speeches. And I'm like, what's this? This is what you guys do when you hang? And then someone at the table's like, Rick, wouldn't you love this for the CISO community? I'm like, no, we don't want to be perceived at all. We don't want the regular, like last thing we want to do is get up there and try to like, why am I getting this? It's like, this is a team effort. This is a thing. I have the support of my community. And I went to like 2 or 3 others last year. They're the same way. They're getting up and they're giving each other awards and doing acceptance speech. You're like, what is with the CIO community? It was like, but I get it. You know, we get to help people out. We're pulling thorns out of lions. You know, we're preventing things from happening. We're recovering from things. And so we get the joy of just a job well done when we rescue something and bring it back up and everyone's happy about that. Where technically in IT, you know, like if everything is working, no one's saying, good job. They only hear from it when something bad happens. So I get it. But I also noticed that our community is tight. I mean, when people come to do a CISO dinner with us, they're like, I cannot believe you are all best friends. We have inside jokes. I know everyone's food allergies. You know, I can tell you, it's like, okay, you know, Ben has a tree nut allergy and AJ has a shellfish allergy and she's vegetarian and she's gluten-free and everything. And someone there. And it was funny because one of my friends who has the nut allergy, I was talking to his wife one time a few months ago. I was like, I worry about him so much because he goes to all these dinners And like, you're there. And I said, don't worry, Janet, there's at least 3 EpiPens at every table. So, and I know who all the people are, but, but everyone comes to our town realize like how tight we are. And I don't see that in the CIO community. And part of the reason I think is just, it's a competitive role, right? It's, we're building the IT that helps us make money. We're building the infrastructure, the platforms to help us make money. And Charlotte's the banking capital of the US. We have Bank of America, we have Wells Fargo, Ally Bank, Truist Bank, Honeywell. So we got everybody. We also have Lowe's Home Improvement and all the way down to Krispy Kreme and National Gypsum, So what I love about my community is it's so diverse. But among the CIOs, they're just not as tight, because what I say about the CISO community is we're a support group. At some point in the night, there's going to be crying and hugging, and we're going to be, because we need each other, because not many people understand what we go through. I appreciate the talk about like the managing the incident. So unless you're a CISO who's been through either an APT incident or a ransomware, you got nothing to say. Because unless you've lived through that, 24 hours a day for weeks or months and getting through that and coming out the other end, you got nothing to say. And so, but if you have, it's like, what do we do with that? Because the other thing is trust. The thing about these musicians is you're the Rolling Stones and you're walking in there and saying, hey, I have an idea. One of the things special about Muscle Shoals, and Eric alluded to it, saved me all kinds of time. The 10 minutes I'm cutting off is because you already gave the background of it. I don't have to explain that. Is that these were just a bunch of hillbilly musicians from Alabama, and they were just exceptional musicians, and they could play anything. And so they had, people came to them because of the mix of, country and rock and soul and blues and jazz and everything. They're just kind of like working in whatever. Where when you're in LA, one of these big professional, or New York professional studios, these are all like Juilliard trained session musicians, sight reading music, doing it by the book. And these guys are like, whatever, we're just kind of playing along with whatever. Hey, this sounds pretty good. Let's go do this. And so, as Eric said, they really influence people because they were able to be adaptive. And that correlates so well to our industry, right? It's like, I have no idea what I'm going to show up to every day. My team in the operations center have no idea what they're going to be dealing with, but they're going to have to be agile. They're going to have to figure things out. They're going to have to troubleshoot. And that all kind of comes down to the personality type. 25 years ago, I used to run ethical hacking team from the late 90s to late 2000s, before it was cool. And I always said that I hired people based on personality and aptitude. I give a crap if you went to school, what your grades are, if you have certification, none of that matters. I've interviewed people way smarter than I am with degrees and advanced stuff. And I'm like, dude, you can't do this job. But I never could articulate what it was. I knew it when I saw it, and I could interview them. And I'll tell you kind of how I interviewed them in a minute, but now I can. And it's the same thing that comes back to these session musicians, is that they just want to do the job because they love music and they love diversity. They love new things. They love learning new things. And they always want to be better because they know they can be better. And they're never satisfied with where they are. And they also know someone who's better than they are. So they're like, well, I want to be as good as they are, even though they're probably the best in the room. I used to say back in my team 20 years ago, it was like, if you ask them who's the smartest one in the room, they all go like this. And I tell them, like, if you wake up and you're the smartest one in the room, it's time to go because you're not learning anything. And if you want to be the smartest one in the room, I would never have hired you anyway, but you're not right for the team because you want to be, you always want to be learning. And that's the important thing in music. For 10 years, I've done all kinds of crazy stuff. I always love it when they say, oh, so something interesting about you. I'm like, I got 2 dozen things. One of them was I was in a professional a cappella choir for 10 years. From 99 to 2009. I would get in, it was 24 of us. I was a tenor two, tuxedo, formal, singing in big things, Latin, German, Italian, a lot of Estonian, because, modern choral work's all written in Estonian for some reason. And one of the things that my director always said is we were his instrument. All we did is stand there looking at him, and I don't do anything. I am part of the whole. We are unified. I'm next to people in different, we mixed up, I'm next to an alto and next to a soprano and a bass. We're not in sections because we're blending with everybody because we should not stand out. If you hear yourself, you did something wrong. We work hard on tuning, not just the notes, but the tone. Are we brighter? Are we softer? Are we this? Are we, all these different things where we're holding resonance in our mouth, because it should be seamless. If you've heard an a cappella group that was just like one voice, that is the tone that they have, that they worked, and particularly like ones who are siblings because their throats are, genetically the same, so it's easy to match that. It's amazing. As opposed to ones who are like, why does it seem off? They're not out of tune, but it seems off because one's a little brighter, one's a little softer, one's a little forward, etc. Keeping that mindset of like, I have a place to absorb into the ecosystem, into this, not even ecosystem, into this big thing. What I'm thinking, there was an E word that I was thinking about, which escaping me. But anyway, I absorb into this one organism. That's it. We're one organism. We are one voice. We're one thing. The security team has to be that way. We all have to be going in the same direction. We could argue vehemently against the right way or which way to do it, but we all have the same goal. And that's the important part. And that's where musicians have to have that same thing. And so I love the corollary of the two of them. But one of the things that kind of makes it that way is the personality that I mentioned. Those of you who are like followed anything that I've done and seen all the crap that I keep posting up on LinkedIn, I talk way too many things. I'm on way too many podcasts. Like, I'm embarrassed that I'm like way overexposed, which is one of the things we say, right? It's like, I don't want to be perceived, but I have so much I want to say and I want to help people. Neurodiversity within the cybersecurity industry is one of my big topics. I talked about it at RSA this year. I've done it on a number of podcasts. I've done it in a number of keynotes. And what that is, and you kind of mentioned about being dyslexic, the neurodiversity are those brain wiring things that you cannot control. It's not behavior. It is things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. Dyscalculia is like dyslexia, but with numbers. If you ever people say, I don't have the math gene, just doesn't make sense, it's a wiring. Dyspraxia is like your location in space. One of the 11 senses that we have, because we have 11, not 5 that we were taught, is like, I know where my body is in space in relation to the chair. One of the things when people are diagnosed with ADHD is often the clinician will ask, like, do you have bruises on you don't know about? Do you like bump into things a lot when you're walking because you don't notice it? Do you like trip over things? Or you're clumsy? These are things because, your body, your way your mind is connected to your body is not well. It doesn't mean you're not coordinated. It doesn't mean you can't like play the piano or throw a strike or do whatever, but it's just like your perception of where things are, you run into things a lot, right? And it's not because of glasses. Anyway, so belabor that point. Anyway, so these are the things that you have no control over. And one of the things I kind of learned early on when kind of looking into this, I got into this like a year and a half ago. I was watching some neuroscientists on TikTok or Reels or whatever, and they're talking about the traits of autism and ADHD. And I'm like, I don't know anyone who's not that way. What are you talking about? But I've lived my entire career working with very technical, very intelligent, very creative people, like musicians. The creativity and the intelligence are like the key. And then all the other things are what executive functions you are good at or bad at. And I may talk about that a little later. But what I looked at is I went back and thought about 25 years of being a people leader and those hackers that I had that had sensory issues, and we kept the lights off and they didn't like having their collars closed, and they cut the tags out of the back of their shirts, and they didn't like wearing jeans, and they liked to wear shirts that were tight underneath, and all these different things that all like add up to, oh, I see, this actually means something, that these are traits of autism or ADHD. And so in the last year, I've done so many talks about to socialize it and normalize it. That's the important thing. is proudly wear a badge. When I was at RSA, I had all these stickers and all these pins I was giving out to people. This like, 80, a neurodivergent girly, or hi, I'm neurodivergent, so that we like kind of like own the badge, because this is what makes us special. And one of the things that I talk about is like, we make great friends because we want to get deep quickly. We want to have a connection. We want, and when we're honest and we're funny and we're all these things, every comedian, every musician, all of us are this way. And, I could go on a whole other like 40-minute rant about the clinical community as it stands today, which the only thing I'll say briefly is it's very similar to the cybersecurity industry in that in the 90s, we didn't have degrees in cybersecurity. SANS had a couple of courses, but there was nowhere to go. You just figured it the hell out. And that's where we are right now in the neurodiversity side of clinical. Psychologists are not trained in neurodiversity. They're trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. The DSM-5 has only like 2 chapters of 1,000 pages dedicated to that. And unless it's your specialty because you are one or you have one in your family to be able to study separately to be able to do it, there's not a lot of help out there. So I help a lot of people. I went through 60 hours of clinical training to be an autism and ADHD coach. And so, and there is no technical training. There's a PhD program in University of Texas for autism, but it's research. Stanford and Harvard have them in research. Duke has them in research, but nobody's like how to do it clinically. So I just want to say is that it's hard to find help, and more adults are being diagnosed because, particularly Gen X, we had to mask it for years because we didn't want to be different. We didn't want to stand out. We didn't want to be quirky because that just gets it beat up. And so now we all become CISOs, right? And then that's where the community comes in, right? It's like we're among people who accept who we are. One of the things at Muscle Shoals, the original FAME studio started in 1959. Some of their biggest hits were in the early 60s. Heavy segregation. This is Alabama in the early 60s. It was a meritocracy in that studio. Didn't care where you came from, what race you were. Everyone was the same. Everyone was respected because it's all about what you could do. And so cybersecurity industry is the same way. We accept everyone. I have within my community in Charlotte a number of what I would call labradoodles because they're both CIOs and CISOs, and neither pedigree accepts them. So, but yeah, and these are $1 billion, $2 billion companies. They can't afford to have both. So they get the CISO who understands IT and says, hey, Sean, you're going to be both. He's like, okay, go implement this EMR system and then go secure everything. Okay. So I have like a handful of labradoodles within it. And I have a couple of CIOs who are very like part of my community, but we accept everybody. And we have a whole practitioner level community as well called Fish Club. You go to fishclub.com, get on the Discord channel. This is like a young group of analysts that came up, and they have over 400 people on the Discord channel, just Charlotte, but it's open to everybody. And it's just a bunch of cybersecurity nerds who are working their way up. And so we include them in that. So one of the things I want to talk about is like, I mentioned about the traits. And what are these traits? And I said, oh, well, I know what it looks like. So what I found generally is that people either fall into either the single-threaded, meaning like, I do each step meticulously. I'm afraid to fail. I'm not going to take this first step until I figure out all the steps. And I want to have a structure and know what my end goal is. Or on this side, you're multi-threaded. You're doing 10 things at once. You run forward with little information. You fail quickly. You figure it out as you go along. Great. Neither of them are right or wrong. This side make great pen testers. They make great instant responders. They make great waiters and bartenders. This side makes great project managers, great forensics people, great developers because they want like a structure. This side wants to be completely, do not give me any boundaries, just say, this is direction, this is what you want to do, go do it, tell me when you're done. This side is like, what are my rules? What are my guardrails? What are we trying to do? And I have a whole, like I said, 50-minute talk on neurodiversity that I've done for the 500 people in our cybersecurity team, and the 5,000 people in our IT team in my company. And, I go into different traits and different things and all kinds, talk about executive functions and how to do transitions and escalations and focus and distraction and all these great things. And I did the same one at RSA. And the thing that I got most was people said, it sounds like you were talking about me. And I was like, welcome to the club. I talked to a lot of young people in college. We have UNCC, we have a bunch of other, higher ed in our organization, in our city. And when I talk to these kids, and I appreciate it because they've all been diagnosed, right? So they always lead with hey, I was diagnosed when I was 11 or blah, blah, blah. And I remember one young lady said, I'm really nervous about going into the workforce because I'm kind of blunt and I cut people off and I talk a lot. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to the club. That's how we are. And, the cutting off of people and interrupting people is not because you're rude, not because you think you know it all, not because you don't respect them. It's because you have short-term memory and you have this idea in your head. I got to say it now or else I'm going to forget it. And I'm really excited about it. And so that's why I'm jumping in. It has nothing to do with anything. Similar with one of the executive functions and the 11 executive functions you have is time blindness, time myopia. And so executive functions are things like, emotional regulation, impulse control, planning an organization, stalking tasks, self-awareness, time management. And they're kind of like D&D stats. If you ever play D&D, you get a new character. I'm going to make a warrior and I'm going to roll for my strength and roll for my agility and roll for my charisma. And I'm going to see what I got because I'm going to be doing this. Well, it's kind of like that, but you don't get a choice. And you're not sure what you're going to be doing in the first place. So you may show up and you may have poor impulse control and do very dangerous things or risky things or things you shouldn't do, but you can't help it. Or you may have poor emotional regulation. And you spin up right away when something goes wrong. But you could have great planning and organization. So you've compensated for that your entire life by saying, I'm going to have sticky notes and I'm going to plan this out and I'm going to make sure that I'm not upset because I'm going to make sure that everything's all set up before I get there. And I'm going to make sure that I have this thing and all these kind of guardrails to be able to prevent me from that. But the one that a lot of people struggle with is time management. It's a very classic thing for folks with ADHD to be late. And it's not because they're rude. It's not because they don't think it's valuable. It's not because they're disrespecting you. It's because the clock in their head doesn't work. And we have studies, Dr. Barkley talked to the study where they actually tested light turns on, light turns off. How long was that? 10 seconds, whether you're ADHD or neurobeige, as we like to call it, because it's not typical. And then we say, okay, we're going to turn the light on. Then I want you to press a button after 10 seconds to turn it off. The neurobeige folks, we're like, great, like within the same deviation. ADHD folks, wildly off the map. Could be 2 seconds, could be a minute. So when you're just like, oh, I have a call in 10 minutes, let me do this real quick. And then 30 minutes later, you're like, oh crap, I missed it. That's not your fault. That's your brain. And it's not because you're disrespectful. It's not because you're stupid. It's not because you're inconsiderate. It's not because you're rude. It's because your brain's not wired to do that. Fine. Start setting timers. Start putting sticky notes. Start having these things. Start putting alarm. There's all kinds of ways to do accommodations for that. And that's the kind of thing that when talking to people leaders and tying it back to to Muscle Shoals, you have these great musicians who are in this room in this little town in Alabama who are unique because of their skill and probably couldn't get into Juilliard and probably couldn't be in a band because they may not be able to do the tour schedule or show up or do these things. But if they have to get up and go 3 blocks down the road and be there in their pajamas and just do amazing music at 3 a.m, they got that. And that's how they can contribute into their society. And that's what we do in our industry is we may be up all night figuring out a problem, using fluid reasoning to come up with unique solutions, be able to look at something with a different perspective and have the work ethic to be able to follow through and be able to have that friendship and that camaraderie to, even if you don't understand it, instinctively know that I'm supplementing executive functions of my friends. I've done that all my career, and I didn't know that's what I was doing, is that I would make sure that people would be there on time by telling them we're going to be there 30 minutes before, or I'm going to make sure that they're going to have, poor impulse control. So I make sure they don't have anything to distract them while they're doing something, and all these things so that we can all be productive. And so the last thing I'll say, I'll mention, then we can get down and eat. Well, you're eating. I can get down and eat, but I eat fast, so I'll probably be done before you anyway. Is there are stages of late stage adult diagnosis of ADHD. And I had tea with a friend of mine 6 months ago. He said, Rick, I finally got diagnosed and he's in his late 40s. He goes, I got medication and I have been more productive in the last 2 weeks than I have ever been in my entire life. And I just cannot believe how effective I have been in not procrastinating, getting things done, not worried about things, prioritizing and following through on task because he was able to regulate those executive functions he had deficits in. And he said, I feel sad for what I could have been if I would have been diagnosed 20 years ago. How successful would I have been? Where would I have been in my career? And I said, Jason, you're in stage 2 of the 3 phases of, kind of like the 5 stages of grief, right? It's 3 stages of adult ADHD. They happen really quickly. It goes right to the end. First one is anger. Like, why didn't somebody tell me this? Why didn't somebody, like my doctors, my schools, my mother, my parents, my friends, why didn't somebody point this out to me before? And then you kind of get over that and then you're like, oh my gosh, what would my life like if I knew this earlier? But then you quickly get over that and you get to the last stage, which is excitement. Because this is the first day of the rest of your life. And now you know why you behave this way. And now you understand why your family, your friends, your kids, and everything else is this way. And then you realize you're part of a community that is understanding. It's like, oh, and then you forgive yourself. And you forgive your friends, just like kids, and you forgive your coworkers who behave this way. And you now can go forward and live your blessed life knowing what you know now. And that's why I talk about this as much as I can. And thank you so much for your attention.